Salesforce Incorporated, ticker symbol CRM, we've got price per share of $270, but what's it worth and where's it headed from here? We're going to be checking out the valuation in a minute, but we're going to start with some of the fundamentals. We've got a price to earnings ratio of 64, market cap of $261 billion, and an enterprise value of $265 billion. Cash debt ratio of 1.13, so they can pay down the entirety of their debts if they chose to. The profitability and the margins look fairly strong, both versus industry and versus their historical, sitting just below that maximum for their current gross margins in the last 10 years. Highest in the last 10 years for operating margin, fairly strong net margins, and free cash flow at the highest in the last 10 years. So pretty strong margins. For management strength, I use ROE, ROA, ROIC, and ROC. And for these, it looks okay, but single digits is definitely not what I want to see. I want to see 10, 20, 30, 40, 100% ROE, ROA, ROIC, and ROC. And I'm seeing single digits and then 94 for return on capital, which is pretty good, but higher the better for those. Price to earnings, they currently have 64.29 with a minimum of 45 and a median of 145. So even though a 64 price to earnings ratio is not cheap, it's actually pretty close to their minimum for the last 10 years. Looking at their financials on a 30-year basis, we can see that in their most recent, they've achieved roughly $35 billion in revenue. And 10 years ago, they achieved $4 billion. So pretty big multiple, dramatically increasing that revenue. On a trailing 12-month, we can see the net income actually decelerating and then picking back up here. Cash to debt just about in pace with each other. Slight buybacks recently. Very diverse business segment. They generate revenues in many different ways, with the bulk of those revenues coming from the United States, Europe, followed by Asia, and other Americas. And it is growing pretty significantly over time. But to see what it's truly worth, let's run a DCF. So currently for earnings per share, there's about 23% growth priced in for the next 10 years. If you think they can achieve faster than that, maybe closer to 30, then we could see a 441 fair value. In the last 3 years, they've averaged 45, but I don't necessarily think they're going to achieve that over the next 10 years. So 23 would be roughly fair value for the next 10 years. 25 could see 316 for a fair value. 30. And on a downside, if they achieve 20, a fair value could be 226. And 15, even though it's unlikely, could achieve a 162. Based on free cash flow, we've got 23 priced in for the last 10, so that's what they achieved. 5-year average of 19.6, a 3-year of 29.9. So I don't think 20 is all too far off of what they could achieve for the next 10 years. Based on their average for the last 10, 5, and 3, I think it's pretty close to realistic. Maybe even 22, which would leave us with 344. 25 could bring us to 421. And on a bearish estimate, if you think they fall down to 17 for the next 10, we could see 246. And 15 leaves us with 215. So to me, Salesforce is actually looking like it's fairly priced based on free cash flow and based on earnings per share. It looks pretty much fairly priced as well. Don't have as much data to base it on for earnings per share, but the valuation looks pretty solid. Margins were pretty strong. Cash debt ratio is more than 1, so pretty good sign there. The management returns seemed a little bit mediocre. The price to earnings ratio, it is close to that lowest price to earnings for the last 10 years, We can see that the revenues are pretty steadily increasing, and the margins, even though they're not quite as steady as I'd like to see them, they are increasing. And it's a pretty diversified business, with currently the bulk of their sales coming from the United States. So let me know what you guys think of this business. If you think it's going to be expanding into Europe, if you think this is a business that's needed for the United States. Some people think of Salesforce as a necessity. If you work in sales, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But that's my take on CRM stock, and I'll see you next time.